Well, I don't really know how to go about making this video, but before I get into it, I do want to quickly say that this video is sponsored by Squarespace, so thank you, Squarespace. More on them later. But I guess I'll just come out and say it. The FAA has suspended my license for 60 days. And now we are appealing that decision, so I'm currently able to fly, but this has been about a 2.5-year process that I've been holding off sharing with you guys because I've been wanting to wait to see how it played out before I went talking about it. But even though we aren't completely done with the entire process, I think this is probably a pretty appropriate time for me to fill you guys in. And while, again, I'm not exactly sure the best way to explain this, I think I should probably start right at the beginning. So about 2.5 years ago, this was on November 24th of 2019. I was out playing in the Kit Fox, and on my way home, I made a inspection pass on a friend of mine's property. Basically an area just north of where I live. It's a very sparsely populated area. I mean, it has a minimum lot size of 10 acres, but a lot of the lots are much larger than that. A lot of them are vacant as well, and the area to the north of them is all BLM. So there's thousands of acres of public land, and they're the first kind of very sparsely populated residential area to the south of that. Now, my friend and neighbor has a very open, large backyard that he has an airstrip that he had made for flying radio-controlled aircraft off of. And both my friend as well as his son had been asking me if I could come and land there. So I went ahead and made an inspection pass, and on what would have been a short final for that inspection pass, I realized that I wasn't really able to identify the touchdown point for that landing spot. That, as well as like the intended center line or the direction that the runway would have ran or where the end of it was just a lot harder to see from the air, so I opted to move on. Now, a few days later, I got a call from an inspector at the Reno FSDO, which is the local FAA branch, asking if I would come in for a meeting. I said sure, and the next day I went in for this meeting at the FSDO. Now, while I was there, they showed me a video that the neighbor of my friend had provided from his surveillance camera. Basically, it was an angle facing up in the sky that had me flying through on my inspection pass. Now, this video was interesting because it wasn't the actual surveillance video. What it was a cell phone recording of a TV screen playing the surveillance camera video. So it was kind of funky in that nature because we all know that the angle of view or field of view of a surveillance camera is extremely wide, and with that comes some distortion, and then you add the cell phone filming the top corner of it. It really wasn't the clearest video, but the FAA inspector made it very clear that I would be losing my license and that he was recommending a suspension of 210 days or 7 months to the FAA legal team. Now, at that meeting, I did not deny that that was my aircraft or that was me. I admitted to both of those and that was me making a inspection pass on a friend of mine's property that I was given permission to land at. Now, the inspector didn't seem to care about that, so then it was forwarded on to the FAA legal team. So after that initial meeting, it was pretty clear that I needed to seek some legal representation. So I got myself an attorney. And then nothing happened for a few months. I think the next thing that happened was an informal conference that we had, being my attorney and myself, with the FAA's attorney on the legal enforcement team. Now, this was just an informal conference, so it was a phone call to discuss my case. Now, before I go any farther, I should probably explain what regulations the FAA say that I violated. The first is a regulation that pertains to flight at a safe altitude. It's 91.119. Parts A and C are the ones that they state I violated. And now I don't have this regulation in front of me, but we've been discussing it a lot, so I can give you at least a rough idea of what it says. Again, this isn't verbatim, but it's pretty close. But basically, it states, except when necessary for takeoff or landing. And then Part A says that at any time, a flight must be conducted at an altitude that in the event of a power unit failure, an emergency landing can be conducted without undue hazard to persons and property on the surface. Now, this is basically saying that you need to be at an altitude that if your engine quit, you could navigate to somewhere relatively safe to land. Basically, you can't create undue hazard to other persons and property. So you can't be, at an altitude that if your engine quit, you're going to center punch a school bus. Now, Part B of this regulation pertains to populated areas or congested areas. That didn't pertain since I was over a sparsely populated area. Part C does pertain for non-congested or sparsely populated areas. And this part doesn't state a specific altitude, it's actually a distance. So it states that at any point you need to stay 500 feet from vehicles, vessels, persons, and structures. Now this you could kind of picture by like a straight line that you would draw from the aircraft in any direction, or kind of think of it as a 500-foot radius to a bubble that would surround the aircraft. Now again, both of these rules are predicated with the exception that except when necessary for takeoff or landing. So as long as it is part of a necessary landing procedure, then you are able to be within 500 feet of vehicles, vessels, persons, and structures, and you're able to be at an altitude that if your power unit failed, you wouldn't be able to guarantee undue hazard to persons and property. If that makes sense. Basically, you're accepted from those rules when it's necessary for takeoff or landing. Now, the other regulation they stated I violated was 91.13 or 9113, careless and reckless, which is when they can argue that you endangered the life of another person. Now, this is kind of FAA's rubber rule. This is one that they'll throw out on pretty much anything, because if you think about it, really anytime you're carrying a passenger, or if you're flying above or near any persons, they could argue that you endangered the life of another. Now, this regulation doesn't normally stick unless there's another violation involved. Now, back to this informal conference. My attorney and I were explaining how this inspection pass is a necessary part of an off-airport landing. And you guys have seen in past videos of mine my process for landing somewhere new, that I always am going to make multiple inspection passes to assess the surface quality and the feasibility of the landing spot. But you guys don't just have to take my word for this. Now this right here is the Off-Airport Ops Guide. It's a publication from the FAA. Now, page 3 of this guide is going to outline the techniques for off-airport operations, and it recommends making high-level, intermediate, and low-level inspection passes. And it states very clearly that each pass should result in you becoming more comfortable with your chosen landing area. If you're becoming less comfortable, abandon the site and seek a more suitable landing area. So this document, the Off-Airport Ops Guide, is what we presented to the attorney on the FAA side to argue, hey, look, this was a necessary step of a landing procedure at a new location. Obviously, I was given permission to land there. The FAA had spoken with my friend who owned the property. They had gotten that statement. And after explaining our side of things, the FAA attorney replied with something along the lines of, well, that's all good and well, but I don't understand why that landing is necessary. I think we're going to need to go to a hearing. And at that point, I don't think my lawyer had anything else to say, and the phone call ended there. Now, after the phone call, my attorney called me directly and stated he had no idea what the FAA attorney was arguing with that, because obviously there is no requirement for the necessity of a landing. I mean, honestly, the only landing that in my mind would be absolutely necessary would be an emergency landing, or if your engine had quit. Other than that, we're taught that we should always be able to do a go-around. So at this point, it was clear that the FAA attorney wasn't going to work with us, so it started the beginning of the legal battle of the administrator versus Palmer. Now, the next part didn't happen quickly. I think it was another year and a half or more until they even scheduled our hearing. And now the hearing, which we did just a couple weeks ago, we went into with my lawyer telling me he was estimating it was probably going to be a 3-hour hearing. I mean, it's a pretty simple case. From the start, you know, I had never argued that I was within 500 feet of vehicles, vessels, persons, and structures. So the argument was never that. The argument should have been if they didn't believe that it was necessary for takeoff or landing, or if it was not an acceptable landing site. But neither of those points were ever mentioned in their case against me. So we figured it was going to be a pretty cut and dry hearing. Now, this hearing that we expected to go on for a few hours ended up running the course of, I think, 5 days. And now, the backbone of the FAA's case was this video that they had received from the neighbor of my friend. And now the problem with this video was that it was never received in its original form. And there is a law that's called the best evidence law that requires that any photo or video that is used as evidence has to be an original or an exact duplicate of the original. And since this video was a cell phone recording of a security camera's footage being played back on a TV screen, it was definitely not an original. It was a video of a video. So that video was never admitted as evidence. Now, in addition to that, the FAA had provided a bunch of diagrams and photos with measurements and stuff that was directly based on the video that they had received. And again, because the video was not admitted as evidence, none of the other documents, or most of the other documents, weren't admitted either. So this hearing turned into hours and hours and days of the FAA attorney interviewing eyewitnesses, because there were 2 neighbors that were outside when I made my inspection pass. And she was trying to figure out down to the exact foot how far I was from structures and persons and all that. And obviously the rule states you cannot be within 500 feet of vehicles, vessels, persons, and structures. So it doesn't matter if you're at 499 feet or if you're scraping your tires on something. If it wasn't as part of a necessary landing procedure, then you would be violating that regulation. Now, so this hearing, like I mentioned, we spent about 5 days going back and forth about the exact distance I was from objects. And also there was the discussion of, in the event of an engine failure or power unit failure, could an emergency landing be conducted? And as I mentioned, this was over a very sparsely populated area with a minimum lot size of 10 acres. So when you're talking a single family residence on a 10-acre lot, if your engine quit over that, I mean, you would have to intentionally aim for the house to hit the house. I mean, all you'd have to do is turn 10 degrees in any direction if your engine quit, and you're going to be able to land out in the open desert. So there was no point during this flight that I wouldn't have been able to conduct an emergency landing if my engine had quit. But at the end of this entire hearing, the judge, when he came to make his initial decision, he basically stated that since I didn't land, that it wasn't necessary for takeoff or landing, and also since there wasn't a windsock or any sort of runway lights or runway markers, that it wasn't an acceptable landing site. So he ruled against me on all fronts and suspended my license for 60 days. And now, I don't really know how to put this. Look, a 60-day suspension for me is not the end of the world. I'm a private pilot. I fly recreationally. This is just for fun for me, of course. I will be fine if I go 2 months without flying. The problem here is the precedence or the case law that is established by this decision. And for those of you that don't understand how case law or this kind of precedence works, basically now, if this sticks, from here on out, anyone else that's in a similar situation to me, the FAA will be able to look at the administration versus Palmer, and based on the ruling of this ALJ administrative law judge, they will be able to say, well, this is a past case, this was a legal ruling, and that is case law, being this is how it works. And the problem with that is that by the judge or the ALJ stating that because I didn't land, it wasn't a necessary landing procedure. Now, that would basically mean that anytime we want to land in a new place that would require inspection passes to assess the feasibility of that spot, if there were any chance that you were within 500 feet of a vehicle, vessel, person, or structure, knowingly or unknowingly, you would need to go land there for it to not be a violation, meaning there would be external pressures making us change our aeronautical decision-making. And I don't know if I'm putting that clearly enough, but basically it would force us to land, even if we didn't think it was safe, to try to avoid being violated. And I mean, this could even be someone, say you had just bought a new airplane and you live on an air park that has a grass strip, and it's your first time that you want to go and land at your air park, and on approach, you decide, I don't like how long the grass is, or one of a million other reasons. Maybe I'm not comfortable in this airplane yet with landing in that short of a distance or on this narrow of a runway, and you opt to go around and carry on, and you don't come back and land, you would have just violated this regulation. Because there are plenty of air parks that have a runway with houses well within 500 feet, oftentimes within 100 feet of the center line of the airstrip, that if you didn't land, then you would be violating this regulation. Now, on top of this, the statement that this was not an acceptable landing site based on the fact that it didn't have a windsock or runway lights or other identifying markers on the runway makes it not acceptable. That logic would basically make every single off-airport landing illegal. And obviously, that has not been the case. Off-airport landing is legal. That's why they have the off-airport ops guide explaining the procedures and techniques to land there. So I hope this makes sense to you guys and why I'm stressing this, but there is a precedent set with this case should this decision be upheld that could be very bad to not only me and my future backcountry flying, but everyone else. And I feel horrible because obviously I don't want to be any part of us losing some of the freedoms or rights we have as a pilot. And so that's why I think I felt it necessary to make this video to fill you guys in. And obviously, I think we have a pretty strong case for our appeal. I think there were definitely some good things that my lawyer will outline that were errors on the judgment side of things. But for those of you that haven't been involved with the FAA, as far as I have, as far as going through a hearing like this, all I can say is it's frustrating. The reason being, if this was a civil case, let's say I had robbed a bank at gunpoint, it would be my right to a trial in front of a jury of my peers, meaning other citizens or civilians. Now, the FAA, they don't have to do that. They don't allow you any jury or any unbiased opinions. The judge himself is the jury and the judge, and he makes the decision based on what the FAA and the FAA's witnesses, which are other FAA employees, bring to the table against me. So the idea that you feel like you had any sort of fair trial or fair judgment in a case with them is unfortunately not possible. And herein lies the dilemma going forward. Now, with this appeal, I'm going to try to argue to the NTSB that the NTSB judge or the ALJ made an error in his ruling against me. So I'm basically telling the NTSB that one of their own didn't do his job right. So it's obviously going to be an uphill battle. At the end of the day, the ALJ is always going to rule with the FAA whenever possible. And the NTSB on the appeal side is going to rule with the ALJ whenever possible. So that is currently where we stand. We are beginning the appeal process, which I am able to fly during. So that's one thing I should mention. So they're going after a suspension of my license, which all that means is that when the time comes, I send in my license. After the time, they send it back to me. Now, this is a lot different than an emergency revocation, which is when the FAA will, when they see fit, if it's a matter of national security or if it's an immediate threat to others, they will take someone's certificate, which is effective immediately. So if you ever get a letter of an emergency revocation, your flying privileges are gone. They're revoked. You cannot fly. And in those cases, everything happens very fast. I think you have like 48 hours to appeal, and then you have a hearing within 10 days. Obviously, mine took 2.5 years to come to that point. So mine is not a revocation. It's just a suspension. I don't have to take a check ride like I would with a revocation afterwards to get my license back. They'll just send it back. And again, the FAA had originally requested a 210-day or 7-month suspension, and it's now down to 60 days, which is better. So yeah, and I know this probably isn't the best video to say thank you to Squarespace, but thank you, Squarespace, for not only sponsoring this video, but being such a huge supporter of me and this channel. And for those that don't know, Squarespace is the ultimate way to build a website and run your business. You start with one of their award-winning templates, crafted into your own beautiful professional website that works on both desktop and PC. And I honestly mean this when I say that anyone can do it. It's a super easy to use and intuitive interface. It's all drag to drop, click to change. It's as simple as anything can be on a computer, but you're able to build your own professional working and looking website. And they have integrations for pretty much everything. So whether you're trying to insert a professional photo gallery or an online store, or have integrations to book clients for whatever business it is that you run, you're gonna be able to do that with Squarespace, as well as a ton of other things that are too long for me to list. So if you have yet to build a website, or if you have an outdated one that you've been putting off updating, you're running out of excuses. And because Squarespace also sells domains, they truly are the one-stop shop for everything websites. So if you haven't yet, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to purchase, make sure you use code Trent Palmer at checkout. That'll get you 10% off. Thank you again, Squarespace, for sponsoring this video. And yeah, after this one, hopefully we'll be back to flying. I am due for a condition inspection on my plane as of next week, I believe. So that's probably gonna be the next thing on my mind, and then I'm gonna get back to flying. The weather here has been gnarly. We've had like 2+ weeks of 30-mile-an-hour winds nonstop. So as soon as we get a break in the weather and I have my plane out of annual, or maybe before it goes out, I'll be back to making flying videos. So you guys know the drill. Like this video if you do, subscribe if you haven't. Come be my wingman. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.